Hello and welcome to The Drum. I'm Steve Cannane. Coming up, the opposition accused of another costings con job. Mary McKillop finally on an even keel with Don Bradman. And why opposition leader Tony Abbott stands by his accusations of low bastardry. Our panel tonight, host of Radio National Breakfast, Fran Kelly, Chris Berg from the Institute of Public Affairs, and joining us in Canberra is former Labor advisor, currently with Hawker Britain, Simon Banks. Well, the Finance Minister, Penny Wong, has accused the opposition of not telling the truth about their pre-election costings. In a leaked email to the Fairfax newspapers, the accounting firm used by the coalition, WHK Horwath, said its work for the coalition did not constitute an audit. During the election, their Treasury spokesman, Joe Hockey, said the coalition's promises had been audited. We haven't heard from the opposition Treasury spokesman today because he's on holidays. But here's what he said about the costings back in August to ABC News breakfast host Virginia Trioli.
We have the fifth biggest accounting firm in Australia auditing our books and certifying in law that our numbers are accurate. I'm prepared to back those people
based on assumptions that you provide.
Virginia, they have certified our numbers based on all the information we have provided them. They have legal obligations and legal risks.
Now, Fran, the costings issue was harming the coalition during their negotiations with the independents. It's still harming them, isn't it, at a time when they're banging on about economic management with the government?
Well, look, it's just noise around, I think, and it just all goes to show how we're still somehow caught up in the old paradigm of the election campaign. But I think it was that last phrase there that gets Joe Hockey into a little trouble now. During the election, I mean, I, for one, never thought this was a formal audit process. And what I heard during the campaign was the coalition saying they've got their sums, basically, they've taken them to the Horwaths, and Horwaths have looked at it, added them up and said, yes, that's basically about right. We always understood it was on the assumptions fed in by the coalition. Wayne Swan was keen to make that point through the campaign. When, under pressure, Joe Hockey there, in that interview, and I suspect in a few other places, said, you know, Horwath have legal responsibilities. They have to be careful about what they sign off on. In other words, you can take this as gospel. Of course, Horwath, this was not a legal auditing process. It couldn't be a legal auditing process. It was done very quickly. It was done on the sums that the coalition had put forward to them. It was something quicker and dirtier than that. It was always a political fix. And most of the time, I think Joe Hockey was using auditing in the sort of more relaxed term of, yes, they've looked across at their sums and given them a tick.
Well, we'll hear a quote now from Professor Bob Walker, who was on ABC News 24 this afternoon, and he's an accounting standards expert from Sydney University, and he said it might be time for better costing standards to be set.
It's either a clumsy mistake by two people who are going to be in charge of the nation's finances, or it was deceitful. But it's interesting that Penny Wong is in the interesting position as Minister for Finance of having some role in the appointment of members of the Financial Reporting Council, which in turn appoints members of auditing standards boards. And I think it would be quite useful if she directed that body to come up with some more relevant standards.
So was it clumsy or deceitful, Chris? What do you think?
I don't think the coalition really expected to still be talking about costings, but it all comes back to a strategy they had during the election to avoid the trap set by the Charter of Budget Honesty, which allows, or depending on how you view it, compels oppositions to hand their policies over to Treasury. Now, the coalition was certain that Treasury was really highly politicised because of Treasury's role in the global financial crisis and the coalition's relationship with the Treasury Secretary. So what they did is try, instead of just doing what all oppositions do, which is just, you know, give them a few policies at the last minute and hope everybody forgets about it, they decided to go one step further and say the entire system is broken. Hey, watch this, we'll build a better system. Now, obviously, that's kicked them in the head. It most obviously kicked them in the head when there was this 17-day interregnum where they had to answer for all these problems. They were hoping to just either slip into government or slip into opposition, and everybody would forget about it.
There was over-egging on another front too, which we have known about since, which was the claim that NatSem had modelled their assumptions, and NatSem had come down and basically on their side of some of these policy costings. In fact, NatSem have said they never had any official contact with the coalition. There was no request for them to model their policies, but perhaps what the coalition were using was work that the Parliamentary Library had commissioned from NatSem. So a bit of, you know, looseness there with the truth too. I think Chris is right. They really weren't expecting this costings issue to keep being around.
It's still going. I want to come to Simon Banks on this now. Simon, what's your reaction to these revelations today?
Oh, look, I'm not surprised at all. I mean, like, it was clear the Coalition were trying to slide through the Charter of Budget Honesty process during the election campaign. I mean, the irony, of course, is that they set this up almost 12 years ago as a process and used it pretty ruthlessly when they were in government to try and make life difficult for the Labor Party, and when the process finally got turned on them, they ran away from it. Well, I think the real debate is about where we go next, actually, and the fact that we've actually got now an agreement between the major parties and the independents to establish a parliamentary budget office, I think is a good idea. I think one of the things I actually personally hate about election campaigns is this sort of tit-for-tat argument you get about minutiae of costings rather than the more substantive issue, which is about whether or not these are good policies or bad policies for the future of the nation.
That's absolutely right, and hopefully that new system will mean that policies will be put in advance of the election campaign, and there'll be some real costings to come to present by the time we get to an election, so we can see.
Which is what we want. We want transparency for voters, don't we? So they can make a real judgment at election time.
And let's face it, I mean, you know, Labor didn't come to this with clean hands either. In the last election, Labor put forward, contributed a whole lot of their policies on the last day of the election campaign for costings. So both sides have now clearly trashed the Charter of Budget.
Chris?
But even then, I think that even with a parliamentary budget office, it's going to be really hard for the opposition to get their policies up to the rigorous standards that you can expect from a government. Treasury has 1,000 people working at the beck and call of government, costing their policies, designing the policies to be costed. Remember, Treasury, the question of the Charter of Budget Honesty is that Treasury actually designs the very policies that they go back and cost during the election campaign. We're not going to get away from that, and the system is going to continuously be stacked against the opposition, with or without a PBO.
Simon, is that anything you can get around? Is that just the unfairness of being in opposition, the lack of resources you have access to?
Yeah, opposition suffer from a lack of resources right across the board, and that's just a fact of political life, and you have to get on and live with it. And it's true. I mean, there are good ideas that you come up with that you'd like to try and put forward as an opposition that a prudent and cautious opposition simply rejects because they can't get them costed properly in advance of an election campaign. The reality in this case was, I mean, Labor, we lived under this system for 12 years. It pretty much got its costings right over an extended period of time. The Coalition just decided that it wasn't even going to bother. And in fact, I mean, I thought one of the really alarming things about their approach this election campaign was that policies they knew had been through Treasury and Finance and rejected by them, they nonetheless decided to put up as savings and try and pretend that they could genuinely claim those savings. So look, the better answer is yes, we need a parliamentary budget office. We need a good liaison between that parliamentary budget office and the Departments of Treasury and Finance to help opposition's cost policies. And it won't just be the opposition that will get the benefit of this, the Greens as well, I think. I mean, one of the advantages I think the Greens have had to date in election campaigns is that they've been able to put forward ideas and not really have to worry about the financial impact of them. They're going to have to do that now too.
Well, still on national politics, and opposition leader Tony Abbott has accused Julia Gillard of low bastardry for disclosing that he had declined her offer to travel to Afghanistan together to visit Australian troops. At the end of a full-day visit to the forces at the Coalition base in Tarankout on Saturday, Mr Abbott said he personally told the Prime Minister weeks earlier that he planned to visit separately. Now, Ms Gillard says she's not playing politics over the arrangements for the Afghan trips.
All I've got to say about that is I think sometimes Tony Abbott runs to harsh words before he's bothered to get the facts, and I think always better to get the facts first.
And at a press conference today, Tony Abbott said he stood by his comments.
Clear is that I just won't cop any suggestion that I am indifferent to the fate of our troops or uninterested in the success of their mission. I just won't cop that.
Did Julia Gillard commit an act of bastardry?
Well, look, she said what she said. I've said what I said. I think it was important to say what I said.
Stop.
Yeah.
Can I just... I've tried to make some calls today to find out what she said, in fact, because I was unclear whether this was a rabbit set running by the PM's office. I was under the assumption it was. According to the journalists concerned and others, it was not. That's not how it happened. Actually, the journalists concerned, Phil Curry, who was accompanying the Prime Minister, heard on the grapevine, literally on the grapevine, nowhere near the PM's office, that perhaps Tony Abbott was going to, made some calls. The PM's office said, look, there had been an invitation, but it's still unclear what's going on because Tony Abbott has some other, commitments. The opposition's office, the opposition leader's office, confirmed that yes, he was considering it, but there, may be some issues. On the day before they left, the opposition's leader's office said, "Look, there's some scheduling problems, so he can't make this trip, and there'll be another trip at a later date." That was it. So no act of bastardry that I can see there. The problem is then when the journalist wrote that story on the Monday morning, it set the hairs running. Then journalists picked it up, put it to Tony Abbott. Did you really choose to come to this conference? Was that your scheduling problem rather than go to Afghanistan? And he used the unfortunate jet lag excuse. That's when it got into trouble. So I think this is a straw man Tony Abbott's putting up now to suggest that people are suggesting he has a lack of interest in the fate of our troops and the welfare of our troops. I mean, no one's suggesting that for a moment. What they're suggesting was his use of that excuse of jet lag was just appalling judgment. Clearly it was never really the reason. Everyone understood that, and he was ill-judged of him to come out with it.
But Fran, Julia Gillard did milk that issue, and was that?
Did she milk it? What we saw was someone said to me, "Oh, Gillard's going hard on this." What did she say? I watched what she saw. She said, "Well, I managed to get 8 hours sleep." Now, is that milking it?
Yeah, but she said the opposition leader had an opportunity to come with me to Afghanistan. He declined that offer. I mean, she did make, try and make a political point out of it.
She is not allowed, as I understand it. The same reason he came up with the jet lag excuse was because he couldn't say, "I am going soon." She couldn't say it either for the same reason. Look, I just think it's ridiculous we're still having this fight, really. There are troops over there in Afghanistan in horrible situations, and we're calling each other names. We've got Christopher Pyne now accusing the Prime Minister of back alley bitchiness, which I presume is him getting his own back for her once, calling him a mincing poodle. But we should stop the name-calling and, get on with thinking about the real issues to do with Afghanistan.
Simon, your response to this ongoing debate over these issues?
Well, look, I think Fran's right. I mean, the only reason why this is a story today is because Tony Abbott yet again has decided to make it a story. I mean, I think it's very poor media management on his part. And Fran's next point is really the key one, is that there's a far more important issue than, whether or not a bit of name-calling is going on in Australia. We've got troops on the ground in a battle. And, let's not pretend that it's easy for them. I'm sure they don't get any great joy or pleasure out of seeing this kind of discussion. I think they'd rather much see a discussion going on about what's happening in Afghanistan, what sort of support's being given to our troops, whether there are, appropriate strategies are being applied. I'm sure they'd much rather have the kind of parliamentary debate that hopefully we're going to have soon about Afghanistan and talk about those sort of issues than what's this, a debate about nothing.
And Chris, it was interesting to come out today that Tony Abbott wanted to be embedded with the troops in Afghanistan, not just a visit and a few photo opportunities.
He genuinely wanted to help fight, which is